Okay, so today I want to talk about a technique people often recommend for oppositional children, and I want to give you an alternative way of looking at things that I personally find more fruitful. So maybe it's just your average strong-willed kid, or kids who wind up maybe even getting an oppositional defiance disorder, or sometimes DMDD, or maybe they wind up getting a diagnosis of ADHD or autism, or pathological demand avoidance, right? Also known as persistent desire for autonomy. So anywhere along that spectrum, that's where parents typically wind up at some point encountering the concept of low demand parenting. And what that means is that they are often suggested to take down the demands because the demands cause a deep withdrawal on that child's nervous system and put them into a fight or flight or freeze pattern and really kick up a lot of anxiety, and that kicks up that resistance and that lockdown. So all of that I completely agree with. And I do think that our kids like this, really what they're telling us is my nervous system doesn't feel safe. And I'm not going to move until my nervous system feels safe. So it doesn't matter what you tell me to do. I'm going to make sure I listen to me because I'm in my body. Now, none of this is conscious. This is like a primal, just like if you touched fire, you'd put your hand back without thinking, like, wow, that hurts. It's hot. I think I'll pull my hand back. It's not like that. It's just a primal physical response that causes that oppositional behavior. My feelings on low demand parenting are that sometimes it's awesome. Indeed, one of the things that I ask the parents I work with to do is to definitely start taking a look at how many demands you are putting on your kid. Everything from come to the table to here, I've got your jacket for you. Those are demands, and parents often don't realize that. They're like, what? I'm doing something for them. But you're actually demanding that they now take that jacket. You're demanding that they come to the table. So there are so many demands, even in the places we don't think are demands. So it is very important for parents to take a look and do an audit of how many demands am I really making on my kid. That's one thing. Lower those demands? Absolutely. Let's clean them out. Let's make sure we're really using as few demands as possible because, again, each one causes a lot of work for that other more sensitive nervous system to have to recalibrate to on a constant basis. So, yeah, we do want to be careful with our demands. However, once we start really thinking of it as low demand parenting, this is where I personally start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Now, I'm going to invite every one of you to really do your own internal check, right? Like how you process and what your family needs is something that only you know. And if low demand parenting as a concept is really working for you, then that's great. Stick with it. But I'd like to also offer you an alternative way to think about this that for me feels like more of a positive cycle, which is instead of low demand, I like to think high consent. So high consent would look like, hey, would you like me to get your jacket for you and leave it by the front door so you can grab it on the way out? That allows the child to consent to the ask. So that actually engages that sense of autonomy, which actively creates safety. So the low demand creates safety because there's less taking you out of equilibrium, but the high consent actually offers the child the opportunity to actively make choices that feel safe. Now, that also means that there is a kind of hidden demand in the high consent, which is I want to know you. I want you to begin building the world that works for you. And I think that's an incredibly important skill that we give our children. For me, low demand means we're cutting things away, which is sometimes really wonderful. But that subtractive nature can also become almost like an unraveling that can go too far, in my experience with certain children. If we're just taking away all the demands, some children will do well, but some children will wind up making their life smaller and smaller and smaller in the way that we see with anxiety. Sometimes kids just stop doing those after school activities and then stop going to school altogether and then won't leave the house and then won't leave their room and then won't get off a screen. And it's like what I call a very regressive growth pattern. And so, in order to keep like new information coming in and kind of like sunlight streaming in and wind streaming in through your family system, I like to make sure that there's always an opportunity for growth and openness. So, I like to think of like training the brain to look for what does work instead of constantly removing all the things that don't work. I feel that inherently at the end of the day, we wind up with a richer life with a child with more opportunities and more possibilities, and parents who feel less afraid and less out of control, but actually more able to slowly move through building what does work for their families. And so for me, that's where I come back to this high consent. High consent means that you also are bringing yourself to the table and learning for yourself. And then when you can, communicating with me as to what your needs are. And I think that's just ultimately for me a better way to think about working with oppositional children. I prefer that kind of perspective. And that's why over the years, all of my work has ultimately come down to the concept of consent. What do I consent to as a parent? What works for me? What feels in line with the values of the kind of parent I want to be? But also, where can my child give consent for how they want to be parented and how they need to be parented? And where are there times that their desire isn't actually what's beneficial for them? Because all of us have places like that. So I think holding our kids to some area of growth is a natural part of our job, but we have to do it responsibly. So next time you find yourself in a space where you are considering doing a low demand option, maybe try out what high consent would feel like and see if you get different ideas and see if those ideas work for you.